Well, a very warm welcome to episode 9 of the HuddleUK podcast. And firstly, an apology for the delay with this coming out. I know we normally release podcasts at 10 a.m. on Saturdays. This is coming out at 10 a.m. on a Sunday, a combination of illness, editing, and my 30th birthday, which took up a few days, as I'm sure most of you can appreciate. Bit of time celebrating with family and friends. There's been a little bit of a delay on this, but I'm finally glad to say it is out. It is here. So thank you very much if you've tuned in. As we always have to do, just a reminder, please, if you're on YouTube, give a like or comment or subscribe, all the rest of it. If you're listening through the website, come on to social media at Join the Huddle UK. Let us know what you thought. We really appreciate all the feedback. We've had some lovely comments over on our Facebook page as well from unique viewers who've found us through the internet, and it's all been really positive feedback. It's been really nice to hear, and makes us pleased that we're doing it. All of our writers, we've got 32 different writers, all of the content still going up over at HuddleUK.com. And some brilliant stuff as well. Free agency style. What a crazy couple of weeks we've had with all the trades. And we will be getting into that in this episode, in more episodes to come. I have to say as well, at the top, this episode was recorded just before my birthday, so around a week ago now. So some of the trades that have happened this week, the likes of DK Metcalf, Cooper Cup, those sort of things, they won't be touched upon in this podcast. This is more a podcast focused on the UK NFL scene as a whole. We go into a few things about the combine and some rookies in particular. But yeah, if you're wondering why we haven't touched upon any of those, that is why. Next week's will be more up to date. But there's a real good chat in this, and it's about the UK scene of the NFL. You might have seen there was a survey sent around about the idea of a UK league going forward, and it was posted on Twitter by Ben Isaacs, who's the guest on this week's episode, a very well-known UK journalist who you'll hear loads from on this episode, a fellow Cardiffian like myself, and apologies for any Welshisms going forward in this episode. Me and Ben were talking for hours on end, only 45 minutes or so made this podcast episode. We couldn't put it all in. We'd have bored you all to death with all of our talk. A big thank you to Ben. He's over on Twitter at Tweets from Ben. And of course, he's got a book that he's written, The American Football Revolution, which I was bought for my birthday by my lovely fiance. So I've been a few chapters into that and really enjoying it. So I'd go recommend that highly as well. Not much more for me to add other than to say, please, again, give us a like, give us a follow, all the rest of it. We've been really enjoying the engagement we've been having with anyone. We've got lots of plans coming up for this month, next month's draft, and again, moving into the rest of the off-season. Without further ado, let's get into our chat today with NFL reporter Ben Isaacs. Ben, thank you very much for joining the huddle today. It's been the off-season, but all the news, it keeps flowing every day. It's never a boring day in the NFL, is there?
As soon as the college football national championship game happened, I was starting on draft work, and that is continuing at pace right now. I'm sure that if we were around doing this 25 years ago, there would be a legitimate off season, but because we can just be plugged into every piece of news all the time, the off season's a myth. It's just a different focus now.
There's a million trades and free agencies that we could talk about, but can see behind you the Bears posters, and that would be the team that you liked. The news broke that a trade with the Chiefs for Joe Thuney. I always say Thuney. Is it Thuney?
No, it's Thuney. Joe Thuney.
Thuney, yeah.
Joe Thuney, like Tyrannosaurus Rex, because that's how long his arms are.
But they've given up a 4th-round pick for him. Someone who's been very good for the Chiefs. It makes me slightly concerned for the Chiefs, considering how badly their offensive line got taken apart in the Super Bowl. It feels like a good building block for the Bears to protect Caleb Moore next year.
Yeah, it's a sensible price. Like, he got exposed in the Super Bowl that if you've got a defensive lineman with much longer arms than Joe Thuney, and he has got these little arms, it's just maths that when you've got two large men pushing against each other, if one's arms are longer and their hands are on the other person can't put their arms on him. And that was happening in the Super Bowl. Now, the Bears' offensive line was the worst in the league last year in terms of if you just watch the tape. I'm not looking at just the general stats on it. That was the worst offensive line in the league. They are rebuilding that line, and it's a good piece. I think what they're going to try and do is use the trade and free agency market as much as possible to reinforce that line, because I get the impression that what they would like to do in the draft is go BPA, best player available, rather than simply best offensive lineman available. It can be difficult getting an offensive lineman up to speed. You perhaps don't see them at their best for a few years. And it's there are a lot of players in the draft who are kind of down as tackles who I think are going to end up as guards. I think they're doing the right thing. They need to rebuild that line. If Caleb has a proper NFL level offensive line, I think we're going to see a fantastic season out of him. He's got what was the best offensive coordinator in the league as his head coach now, but none of that counts for anything if you've got a offensive line that is completely porous. So it's an upgrade, even though he's not. He's like I say, his last game he was bad.
Yes, we don't judge him just on that one game because he's had a very good career in the NFL. As we say, got exposed in the Super Bowl, but and I don't think the Eagles blitzed once in that game, and still Mahomes was running around like a rabbit in the headlights, which says all you need to know about that front four for the Eagles. It makes me laugh. Just looked it up here on the NFL website. If you look at the draft order, the Bears are with the 10th pick. They always list like the biggest needs. The Bears are guard, tackle, center. They've also mentioned wide receiver at the end, but it's basically like you just need a new offensive line. Is there any players that you've been looking at, particularly in the draft, of offensive linemen who you like, who you think will get to that 10th pick?
I mean, Will Campbell, the tackle from LSU, who I do like, but he had a weird combine. Some of it went well, some of it went poorly. There isn't a single offensive lineman I absolutely love. I would feel that if they stay put and they are going linemen, he's the most likely one. Armand Membu, who I think is probably better. I think he might go earlier. But I've now got my heart set on anything other than offensive line there. I would, as I'm speaking purely as a Bears fan rather than anyone who has a little bit of knowledge, just talking purely as a fan. I love the idea of a fantastic edge rusher or Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. So I would love that. And I'm a first round running back skeptic. I think like the people who draft running backs in the first round are the sort of people who like they land in Vegas, they quickly put their suitcase down in the hotel, they go straight down to like the roulette wheel and be like $100 on red. And everyone's looking at them like, you're a chump. You don't know how to play these games. What are you doing? So that's generally how I look at those people. But at certain times, I'd make an exception. And Ashton Jeanty, I'd make an exception.
Chris Trapasso, who was on the show, his actual bio on X says, don't draft running backs in the first round.
Like so many times I've done like a Friday morning, I'll do the show with Nat Coombs and we'll do a draft recap and I'll start moaning about someone drafting a first round running back. And the number of times it's happened where I've been like, do you know what? I like that. There's not many. But Saquon Barkley was one of those. I was like, if you're going to, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, those are the two that most stick out that I was like, absolutely. Wherever you want to take them in the first round, take them. And I'm kind of getting that vibe from Ashton Jeanty. I don't think he's as good as Saquon Barkley coming out of college, but Saquon Barkley has completely changed now how the average person perceives running back value. And the draft is all about value. So he is like Saquon Barkley will be making a lot of money for a lot of young running backs this year.
You did a podcast the other day. I saw looking at the combine, reflecting on it, some players that you liked, some players that you didn't like as much, called College Days, I believe, if I've got that correct.
Correct, yes.
Who were your standouts? So there were a few players. What was the name of the quarterback? It's going to come to me. Will Howard, who you might have seen the compilation of his throws at the combine. Tough to watch, really tough to watch. You know, you root for all these young guys, but he didn't exactly put himself in a good light. Were there any players you really liked on the flip side?
Well, all the running backs went hard and showed like, you know, a lot of them, I say a lot of them, you had some at the very top, like Ashton Jeanty, who were like, I'm not doing these drills. And I think we're going to see more of that in the same way we get a lot of bowl game opt-outs, which is actually turning a little bit more players. Fewer players opted out this year, so more were playing. But we're still getting to the point where people who feel they don't need to perform at the combine don't perform at the combine. But the running backs did really well. some of the wide receivers showed like how deep it is. Like Matthew Golden looked absolutely fantastic. Loved that. And Nick Emanwari, the safety, just incredibly athletic performance at the draft. The combine, sorry, the sort of combine performance that dreams are made of. The sort that like vaults you up draft boards. But my God, I gotta say, the combine drives me crazy. I am like, there is now. I enjoy the combine, and I said on the show I'd love to go to the combine because if you are at the combine, the intel that you get is incredible. When you go to the Super Bowl, it's all about showbiz, and it's all about stupid questions, like if you had to like eat any wild animal, what would it be, or whatever. It's just always something stupid. And then the questions of the combine, it's like, oh wow, okay, it's business. It's weird. Like the Super Bowl was nonsense. Now the games are finished. Now we're down to business. What's going on? So I'd love to do that, but everything important that happens at the combine, you never see. It's the medicals. It's the interviews. Like Abdul Carter's medical was potentially the biggest story of the combine. So, he's going to be out for like 6 weeks. He'll perform at his pro day. My God, if a combine is irrelevant, then a pro day is even more irrelevant. It's absolutely pointless. It's just a branding exercise. So I watch the combine for the entertainment value, but I never read too much into it. So it was great to see the likes of Nick Emanwari do some amazing things. But and I've given this story before on college days, and I don't like to name drop like this. So I'm 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 wary. I'm wary of doing it now. But
You've got to do it now. You've set yourself up. There's no coming back.
So it was in the run up. It was in the run up to a World Cup, and I was interviewing Jose Mourinho, and we were talking about like Jose Mourinho, one of the loveliest guys I have ever interviewed in my life, and I was not expecting to come out of that interview saying that. Basically, the key if you want to have a good time with Jose Mourinho is not to be talking to him really about his job. So I was there through a World Cup sponsor, and it was meant to be all about the World Cup. He was meant to be writing a World Cup blog. Obviously, there was no chance he was writing that blog. Someone was writing a blog, running it past him. So I was there to ask him about World Cup and him growing up watching the World Cup as a kid, and he was like, always made me sad because Portugal would never qualify. And I asked him about like, when you're watching these games and you see a player and they are amazing in the World Cup, are you like, right, we got to find a way to sign this guy? And he's like, never. If that person is not someone that already you really want to sign, you cannot trust the World Cup. You cannot forget everything else you've seen based on what that player does over the course of a month. It might reinforce what you've already seen, but if you didn't like what you saw before, then that World Cup is irrelevant. And if it's a player you didn't even know of, then you definitely shouldn't be like, oh, this player I've never heard of, we should sign him. And it's a little bit like that with the combine. You've got the chance to watch these players all through the season, putting in meaningful snaps. If you didn't love them, and then you love them from the combine, you're doing it wrong. And if the tape is fantastic, and then in the combine you're disappointed, and you think, oh, well, that's the real player, them running around in Lycra, that's the real test, not the 30 games they played in college looking fantastic. So I try to look at the combine in terms of entertainment, but like obviously some players will just come out of it like Harold Fannin, bad combine. Like he's really cost himself some money. So you got to be careful. You got to just not mess it up.
You've ruined my next question. I was about to ask you if you could eat any wild animal, what would it be? So I'll stop that one. The Super Bowl related questions. Weirdly, having on weird Man United manager stories, I once interviewed Louis van Gaal after a Wales-Holland game, and he decided to do the whole press conference in Dutch to start with, understandably, but we were in Cardiff, so it was a bit different. And after 20 minutes of questions, the press officer said, right, he's got to go. And I was there, well, we'll work. I said, well, I've got to get something from him. I said, Louis, you conceded in the 91st minute, but went on, you responded well to score in the 93rd. You must be really pleased with the mentality. And he just sort of looked at me and he went, clearly your Dutch isn't very good, so I'll tell you, I'll explain it for you as well, because everybody else understands.
Oh.
Just sort of hammered me in front of a room full of journalists, which was lovely of him, but he was, did it with a smile on his face and a joke. Yeah, nice chap, Louis. No bad blood there at all. And just to quickly finish up your point, there was one player, Tez Johnson, the wide receiver. He was one who got hammered a little bit for a really slow 40-yard dash time, but everyone was saying, well, there's tape of him in full pads running quicker than this in college football. Bit like what you're saying, don't jump to conclusions if someone does one bad drill or one bad test at the combine. There's a lot more to it than that. Moving on to the UK related stuff, you put a tweet out the other day about the NFL UK and Ireland survey, and the last question on it, I'll get the exact wording up now not to misquote it, was, as an NFL fan, how interested would you be in a local UK and Ireland-based professional American football league of 6 to 8 teams that plays to a good standard with a mix of US and local and international players? Now, the options range from very interested to very uninterested. I think yourself and myself and lots of UK fans would be very interested in that as a concept, a return maybe of the NFL Europe. It was really interesting that was sort of dropped in at the end of the survey. Not much has been made of it, but it could be the sort of, the grass shoots of something big here.
Yeah, I thought it was a really significant question, and that kind of set it up. And then there were a couple of questions afterwards about things like, if tickets were well priced, would you look to attend games? Would you watch games on TV if they were at what sort of things would make you want to watch on TV? And there were options like on at a sensible time and blah, blah, blah. So there were follow-up questions within this. But the wording that you just said, it just shows that this is, I don't know how serious the NFL is about this, but that's a very detailed question. It wasn't like, would you be interested in a professional league in the UK and Ireland? They're saying 6 to 8 teams. It's at a good standard. They're saying it isn't going to be NFL standard, but this is an amateur hour. And we're going to have Americans in, and we're going to have local players as well. They've clearly put a lot of thought into this. Now, it might be that there's a 0.01% chance of it happening, but clearly there are discussions going on. And I wish I could say to you, oh, I've got these sources and I know what's coming down the pike. Like, no one was talking about this. Seemed to catch everybody by surprise, and I think it would be fantastic, providing it's basically a rebirth of the NFL Europe model. Now, NFL Europe obviously died a long time ago, and by the time it had died, it was almost exclusively German teams. This idea, if it happens, I think the suggestion would be is that this would be an equivalent of NFL Europe, and it wouldn't be in other countries. There wouldn't be an equivalent in Germany, for example, because I don't think there's enough players to go around. I don't think you can have multiple leagues like this. I think what they'd want it to be is each team has X number of allocated spots for international players. That might be the sort of players who are in the current ELF, the European League of Football, which is currently the highest standard of American football in Europe. Players perhaps who have gone through NFL Academy. Maybe they didn't get a scholarship offer, and this is a way to potentially give them more game tape. Maybe they can get a scholarship offer. Plus undrafted free agents, and ideally, like NFL Europe, allocated players from the NFL. So that's where I'd like to see it work if it happens. But also, really importantly, is they need a lot of buy-in from across the country. So I'd put it out there like, okay, if there's going to be 6 to 8 teams, what cities are we looking at? So the fact they said UK and Ireland must mean they'd put a team in Dublin, which I'm sure they would under this imaginary league. And obviously they've got to put a team in London. So there's 2 of the 6 to 8 already gone. If they are going to make it feel representative of the UK and make sure that everyone is interested, you need a geographic spread. So you're going to need a team in Scotland, either Glasgow or Edinburgh, but it's unlikely to be both. You'd have a team in Cardiff, so then you've got Ireland, Scotland, and Wales all covered, and you've got London covered. But then that's 4 teams already. You're going to have a team up north. So my thought was Manchester. And it's like there were lots of people saying about other northern options, but I feel like Manchester would be, the best bet. And Birmingham's the second biggest city in the country. So I feel if you went for 6th, that's what you'd be likely looking at if you were looking at it like, right, we need to cover as many geographic areas and population centres as possible. Because I guarantee if they decided, okay, we're not putting a team in Scotland, people from Scotland aren't going to be like, oh, okay, we're all big fans of the Manchester team. They're just going to be like, oh, we're not interested. Forget this. This isn't for us. Because in NFL Europe, when there was just a team in London, there was just one team in the UK. So people in Scotland I spoke to for the book, they were interested in the London Monarchs until a Scottish team came along, but they weren't anti-London Monarchs because they didn't think, oh, well, this is ridiculous. Why haven't you put a team here? Whereas if you put a team in, I don't know, Southampton, but not in Glasgow and Edinburgh, I think the Scots are going to feel, oh, well, you are deliberately snubbing Scotland, so we're out. And that has the chance to damage the perception of the NFL in this country. So I think you have to have Wales, Scotland, Ireland all represented, and you can't have that. Gus, if you're listening, I did a podcast with Gus. He's got a Jets podcast. And I did a podcast with him a couple of weeks ago where we actually talked about this, where Roger Goodell has said in the past about, oh, I think if we had a team in London, we'd have an international division. And we talked through this, and it's unrealistic in so many ways to have just create a new division in the NFL. So I'm not going to get into that nonsense. But he was like, oh, well, I think you'd want Glasgow and Edinburgh. You'd want Dublin and Belfast. You'd want 2 teams in London for the rivalries. And I'm like, there's not enough demand. Like, you can't be like, oh, London should have 2 professional American football teams. Nope. 1. And I still don't know how many fans they'll draw. It's not like they're going to be filling Wembley for this. I would love to see it. I think it'd be great as a development concept. For years, I felt that the NFL doesn't want to have a spring development league anymore. It's expensive. You get players developed through college. There's currently the UFL, which is not a great standard and not a whole lot of buy-in from the fans, but is intriguing if you want to just see some undrafted players. I think it could be a hit. A lot of work would have to be done, but they're asking the question. That's really intriguing.
It'd be exciting for us as, NFL reporters over here. It's kind of the dream, isn't it? For there to be local teams to then go around and cover on a weekly basis, whether, whatever time of the year the season might be. What sort of names, I know, obviously this is a long way off, but what names do you think, the quick fire off the top of your head now, if you had a Glasgow and Edinburgh, what's the franchise name?
Well, do you know what I would do? I think the easy solution for whatever team is in Scotland and whichever team is in London, I think the NFL still owns the rights. You call them the Claymores and the Monarchs, and you say this is a continuation. There is actual heritage with those names, and I would stick with that. And what I would also do, and the thing is that, so you and I are both Cardiff born and bred. So if there was a team and it was the Cardiff something, I would love that personally. However, I think much like in Scotland, I think you would have something that was covering all of Wales and all of Scotland. And maybe even the way they would do these team names is they wouldn't put the geographic location in the team name potentially. It would just be, it's the Monarchs, it's the Claymores. And, God, like, I wouldn't put it past them to be like, oh, it's the Welsh Dragons. Like, and as unimaginative as possible. Obviously, NFL Europe had Barcelona Dragons, but it's a very different. I was a yellow dragon. Dragons aren't yellow. Dragons are red. Read a science book, for God's sake. They're red. So I would guess they would have some pretty bad names for these teams because, really, Monarchs isn't a great name, but it's got nostalgia for a lot of people. The logo became iconic. Claymores is actually pretty good. So beyond that, I don't. Have you got team names in mind? Are you ready to
No.
pitch this to NFL UK Ireland, or are you keeping them to yourself until a meeting?
Oh yeah, I've got a secret meeting myself with Roger Goodell just to pitch all these team names. No, I was just thinking off the dome view. But like you said, I mentioned the 100 briefly there, trying to interject. But like they didn't, instead of saying a Cardiff team or a Swansea team here in Wales, make it Welsh Fire, because you get everyone involved then, and even the local areas, because there isn't a Bristol team. And they did with Manchester, or call it the Northern Superchargers, like they've done in the cricket, instead of making it really city specific, make it regional specific, and you get everyone involved then, instead of making people or turning people off because of the name of the team.
Like in the UK, we're kind of all a bit packed in. Like we got big cities that are very close to another big city, which in America isn't necessarily the case. So if you are in a particular American state and there's one really big city and you might be a 4-hour drive from that big city, but that is your NFL team because that's the nearest one. Whereas here, you put an NFL whatever team whatever they want to call this league. It's not going to be called NFL UK, obviously, because it's going to be Ireland involved, but whatever it's called, and you put a team in Manchester, for example, and you call them the Manchester something, are you then alienating fans from Liverpool or wherever who don't want to support a Manchester team? They will happily go to Manchester and support a team that is based there, but they might not want to wear a load of merchandise that says Manchester whatever on. Like, I'm pretty confident that if they put a team in Cardiff, people who come from Newport or Swansea or whatever might not want a Cardiff Dragons t-shirt, but they might just want one that says Dragons or Welsh Dragons or something. And I'm sure that's partly why they called the Scottish Claymores rather than the Edinburgh Claymores. And then obviously they moved to Glasgow anyway. So I think making them feel more regional is probably the way to go, because I think you want to make people feel across the UK that everyone has a team. And you could say, well, look, you're free to support anyone. And yeah, of course you are. But if you feel like, oh, well, my area is deliberately not being represented, then you might feel, okay, well, I'm switching off. And you can't afford that, because this is still a niche product. And the NFL is niche, and this product would be, in theory, ultra niche. So you'd better make sure you are casting your net widely so that you are not alienating a load of people from big cities like Leeds or Liverpool or Edinburgh, if the team's in Glasgow or whatever, So it's tough, because even at 8 teams, that's not a lot for, all those nations and a lot of big cities. A lot of big cities wouldn't have a team. So I'm excited to see if anything comes of this, and I'm hoping more gets talked about, because loads of people must have done that survey, and I'd be very interested to know, for those who are like, no, I'm absolutely not interested, I'd just be curious to know why. I saw people on Twitter saying like, oh, I don't think the standard will be very good, no one's going to want to watch it. And well, so people watched NFL Europe. I'm not in their millions and millions and millions, but people watched NFL Europe, and that was at a time when the sport was dead on its arse in this country. And it still had people going to those games. You had, say, 20,000 people going to Claymore's games. That was when the NFL wasn't popular here. Now it is. Maybe you could get a lot more than that. Could you get like 40,000 people going to, say, 4 home games for a team in Scotland? I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility, especially if it's well priced. And if there are, I put it out there kind of as a joke, but what if people who had season tickets for these teams were front of the queue for international series games? People obviously didn't love that idea. I did that deliberately because obviously there was the news this week that people who had season tickets were told, yeah, you haven't got season tickets anymore. And it's upset a lot of people, understandably. So this is what I'm saying. You alienate fans at your peril when you are niche.
Yeah, at this stage, they can't afford to be doing that. I think it's a really exciting idea. This isn't something that will come into effect in the next 4, 5, maybe even 10 years. This is a long-term project, but it is exciting. As you say, the question was so detailed. This isn't something that they've just put in at the end of the survey on a whim. It's something that's clearly been thought about in detail, and hopefully, well, fingers crossed that, it goes somewhere, it becomes a thing. That'd be great for the UK fans if they do it right. The other bit, just really quickly, another part of, not just UK, but UK and Ireland based that I wanted to touch upon is the tickets came out today for the College Football Classics over in Ireland, Kansas State Wildcats against the Iowa State Cyclones. I know it's something that you're heavily involved in out there. I've seen some videos of the game last year. Just talk a little bit about it for those who've not heard about it. It's only something that in the last sort of 12 months, 2 years that I've become aware of, but it looks like a really good event.
For UK fans, this is like the best American football road trip you're going to get because it's pretty affordable. So each year they've been bringing over. It's tough because this isn't like the NFL. College football isn't centralized. You can't go to the commissioner and say, "Look, we want to put a game on in our country." You've got to speak to the individual teams and try to make a deal for them to play a fixture and to bring it over. So yeah, I'm lucky that I've been involved in it indirectly because I work on the Nat Coombs show, and the Nat Coombs show is like a media partner. It's meant that they send me over to the States to go to the college games to kind of do interviews and that sort of stuff. And I was at an event in Dublin pretty much this time last week to share like a Q&A about the business of college football, because it is a billions of dollars in college football. If you've not watched college football, it can feel quite different to the NFL, because you get more variety in the offenses, more variety in the defenses. The atmosphere at a college game is much better than an NFL game. I'm sure you've got listeners who've been over to America to watch an NFL game and caught a college game the day before and probably thought, Jesus Christ, like, this is so much louder. The tailgate's so much better. So it's great the Irish government and Aer Lingus have done so much to bring these games over to Ireland. Hopefully, plenty of your listeners will go over. And those of you who do go over, if you see me, please say hello. But yeah, it's great fun. K-State and Iowa State are two good teams. It's very competitive game. These are both evenly matched. These are two teams that will be expecting to challenge for the Big 12 championship and a place in the college football playoff. But because it's in what they call week 0, and you can only play in week 0 under certain circumstances, one of those is you're playing outside the country. It's basically the big curtain raiser. So the NFL has that Thursday night game where usually the Super Bowl champions host the game. College football has this game in Dublin. So it is like the biggest watch sporting event in America that week. And it's weird when you're sat there and you're part of it. So of the current cycle of games they've been doing, so it was Florida State, Georgia Tech last year. The year before was Notre Dame, Navy. So both those games sold out. This one will sell out as well. When it was Notre Dame, Navy, the number of people that came over from America, it was the largest peacetime movement of Americans from one country to another. Like,
what?
Yeah.
That's a brilliant stat.
Yeah, it was like 40-odd thousand Americans came over. Notre Dame fans specifically came over to Ireland for that game. That's why it can be hard to get tickets, because the Americans take the tickets. So it's like you go to the game, the NFL games in London, and if there's 15,000 Americans there, you notice the difference. There were 40,000 who came over from America for that Notre Dame game, and probably about 25,000 who come over as fans of K-State and Iowa State, and it just completely changes the atmosphere. The first year of this current group was Northwestern versus Nebraska, and there was an issue with card payments in the stadium about halfway through the game, and people were trying to get beer, and all the card machines went down, and they were very keen to point out that this was not our fault. It's a problem with the payment system, which is based in England. They were very keen to point out this was not an Irish company. This is not an Irish problem. But basically, you couldn't buy anything, and they had to decide: do we turn everyone away, or do we just give it away? And people were like, they basically set a limit, but word got around the stadium, and we're in the press box, so like we're not popping down to do it, but like They'll give you a maximum of 2 bit. It's difficult to get from the press box to the bar. Basically, that's why I didn't do it. It's not I'm saying I'm such a professional, but they gave a maximum of like 2 pints per person, but it was free for like
Brilliant.
about a quarter and a half. And the Americans could not believe that this was how they'd handled the situation. And they were talking about it on the broadcast. And it was a great bit of accidental advertising, because it kind of was like, well, look, do you know what? If something bad happens, we're going to look after you. And it must have cost them a lot of money, but the advertising of it was great.
I can't imagine that happening at Wembley.
No, no, no. And they would just like, they would turn you away. And the price of the beer at Wembley are pretty atrocious anyway. And I have seen people in the Wembley press box. I don't think the Tottenham press box, but in the Wembley press box, where they've gone and got a beer and they've sat down, their computer is closed and they're sat there with a beer. And there are people looking at them like, yeah, I don't know about this. And at one of the Tottenham games, not this season just gone, the season before, there were a handful of European journalists who were trying to live stream the game on their phones, and they were kicked out, and they were told they would never be credentialed again. Like, what were they thinking? The beer I get, but thinking, oh, I'm gonna live stream a game live from the press box. You are never getting a press pass ever again.
That's so silly. That story reminds me, and you might have seen it in the news a couple of months back here in the UK. There was a pub in Nottingham that was offering a free pint for every goal.
Oh, yes.
Every goal Nottingham Forest scored against Brighton in Premier League, and they scored 7 goals. And there's just videos of all the punters in the pub with 50 pints, 6 of them on a table. And fair play, because as you say, sometimes doing that, the press you get from it is so positive. I think the club reimbursed the pub all the money, and they probably get more punters in to watch the game every week now than they did before. In the moment, I imagine they were terrified about what was going to happen to the stock that week and the days ahead. A brilliant story. And sometimes in calamity, you get these nice stories, but it's not something I've been to over there. It's something that I've, in the last year really looked at doing. But yeah, K-State against Iowa. Do you know the dates of it? I haven't got it in front of me.
Yeah, Saturday, August 23rd at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin.
There we are, Saturday 23rd. Ben, just before we go, I want to do a quick fire, just a free agency. I'm going to list a few players who are up in the air where they're going to land next year. And I just want your quick takes. I may or may not clip this. You never know social media if you get them right or if you get them wrong. We'll go with the callbacks because that's the ones that people want to talk about most. Sam Darnold, where do you think he's going to be next year?
I feel like the Raiders are the best fit, in that they just need someone, and they may still draft someone, but that to me is the one that makes the most sense.
Okay, Sam Darnold in the Raiders kit. What about Justin Fields?
Justin Fields, I kind of think the Steelers should keep him, but I think if he goes somewhere, I think the Giants are a good situation there, because they can still draft someone. I don't think that. I mean, Justin Fields could win a job, and I'm a Justin Fields apologist, but I think the Giants.
I like Justin Fields. I think he's fun to watch, even if he's not the best quarterback in the NFL. If he does stay maybe then at Steelers, what about Russell Wilson?
Do you know what the thing is? Some of these are going to be the same team. So I think the Raiders are so desperate. Not that like, oh, you have to be desperate to want Russell Wilson, because he had an okay season, but I don't think it's going to be something. He would not have excited people. I don't see the Giants wanting Russell Wilson, and I don't see them wanting Sam Darnold, but I think the Raiders would love Russell Wilson.
And Aaron Rodgers, where do you think he's going to be playing
so
in 2025?
So the Giants had, by all accounts, the word coming out of the Giants, but they wouldn't want Aaron Rodgers because he's a Jets cast-off and he wasn't good at the Jets. But again, I think the Jets or the Raiders would actually happily take Aaron Rodgers because of the situation they're in right now. It's a bad draft to need a quarterback. So if you could just fill that gap right now and have someone who can be there as a bridge for a couple of years, I love the idea of him going to the New York Giants. I would not be at all surprised if he had a good couple of seasons there and the Jets feel like we're just cursed. That why does the same player on a better roster, because they've got a better roster than the Giants, how can it be that he flopped so hard? But I think that's life as a Jets fan, I think.
Yeah, did you mention, so I was going to say earlier when you said, do you think you get 20,000 fans to watch a bad football game? 70,000 fans went to watch the Falcons against the Jets a few years ago. Carl Pitts had a good game, but besides that, it wasn't exactly exciting. Have you got any other bold predictions? There's plenty of players up in free agency, lots of running backs, Aaron Jones, Najee Harris. Keenan Allen is a player, as a Bears fan. I mean, I've got about 4 Keenan Allen jerseys next door. I've just bought another one, which is signed. Hero of mine in the NFL. Do you think he might end up back with the Bears next year?
I'd say there's no chance. He was quite the disappointment with the Bears. Like, not just the numbers, but the effort at times. He seemed to really want to be there at first and then got sick of it. Now, a lot of the players really disliked the coaching staff, so it might be that. He was kind of a 1-year rental prove-it deal. He didn't prove it. I think he can still... I mean, whatever contract he signs next year is going to be a lot lower than he was hoping for this time last year. I think he's someone who can still make an impact, but I don't think he's going to be a Bear.
He's going to be 33 by the time the next season starts. Part of me would love him to do a swan song year.
I don't think that's a bad fit. Like, I think he's happy as a Charger, so just run it back again. The expectations will be lower, and he'll just be on a longer leash there in LA, and people will forgive him if things aren't as good because he is rightfully a Chargers legend.
Yeah, you might have probably heard of them, but there's a big American podcast called The Fantasy Footballers, one of the biggest in our world or in the NFL world. They've got hundreds of thousands of listeners, and I would go plug them, but there's no point because everyone who probably listens to this already listens to them. But I was listening to their episode yesterday, and they said he's only 58 receptions off the top 10 of all time in the NFL. And I knew he was up there, but 58, come back to the Chargers 1 year, give him a few targets a game, and getting into that top 10, I think would be great.
I'll tell you what, though, you look at like the sort of top 20 or 30, and you'd be amazed that, I mean, you might not be, but you could be amazed at how many of those are active or players from about the last 20 years, and it just shows how much the game has changed. That, like, there are players who are first ballot Hall of Famers who are way down that list because they played in an era where there were half the number of passes. And Keenan Allen, fantastic player. I don't see him as a Hall of Famer, but easily could retire and, like you say, be in the top 10 for receptions. So, that's the NFL right now.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Ben, we could talk all day, I'm sure, about a million different players, free agencies, and British NFL going forward, but we'll call it a day there. Thank you very, very much for joining the Huddle this week. We'll hopefully have you on again. Enjoy Ireland when you go over there. Enjoy the offseason and the draft. Firstly, last prediction, who's going first overall in the draft, and do you think it will be to the Titans?
Oh, that's 2 very good questions. I would have, if you'd asked me this a week or so ago, I would have been saying I think they're going to go with Abdul Carter. As it stands right now, I think Cam Ward, the quarterback out of Miami, I think he's going to go first, and I think it won't be the Titans picking. I think the Titans will make a deal with somebody. The Giants would be the most likely to be aggressive in that situation. So yeah, that's my guess right now. When I do a mock draft, I tend to not put trades in, but I think that's the most realistic situation right now because of Abdul Carter's injury situation, which I think it just doesn't, he's not going to plummet down draft boards, but I think perhaps takes him out of clear number 1 category.
Yeah, I think he was a lot for most people as that number 1 pick before this foot injury. So yeah, I would completely agree. So Cam Ward to the Giants is your number 1 pick prediction. We'll see how that pans out come April. Ben, thank you very much for joining. And just before you go, I know you've got yourself on social media. You do a whole load of stuff, lots of podcasts. If you want to have a moment just to plug yourself on everything you do, Nat Coombs and the rest.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Tweets from Ben. On other social media platforms such as Blue Sky and Instagram, I'm at Ben Isaacs. That's ISAACS. So many people spell it wrong. Fair enough. I'm on podcasts all over, but especially the Nat Coombs Show and the Edge Rush edition. So subscribe to the Nat Coombs Show and you will get plenty of me, but also the spin-off podcast College Days, and that's Days, DAZE. Most of those episodes are also on the Nat Coombs Show feed, but there are exclusive episodes, so you'll want to get on the dedicated feed, because at the very least you get those episodes earlier. And we are going hard on the draft right now, Dom Corbett and I. So we're about to do our first position group roundtable, and we'll be doing one of those roundtables each week until the draft.
And of course, Ben, the author of the book, The American Football Revolution, How Britain Fell in Love with the NFL, which is pinned on his X profile. You can go find it there, a link to it. Ben, thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the draft. Enjoy your week. Hopefully, we're both feeling a little bit under the weather. Hopefully, we can shake these off soon and get back to full fitness. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you again to Ben for joining the episode. A really, really good chat. You can go see loads of clips from this episode, a few that didn't actually make the episode itself. So some extra bits and extra bonuses over on the likes of TikTok and Instagram for you to enjoy. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode. Hopefully catch you next week. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, remember, give us a like, give us a follow, subscribe, wherever you are. Thank you very much for listening to the HuddleUK podcast. I've been the host, Philip Marsh. We'll catch you next week.